Welcome to this technical assistance session on the American Rescue Plan Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief ESSER subgrant application. Hi, I'm Audrey Shiflett with the Grants Program at the South Carolina Department of Education. This technical assistance is specifically on what you will need to compile and prepare so that you can complete the application process for the ARP ESSER subgrant. We'll look briefly at the purpose of the subgrant and the legislated requirements. We'll also examine the revised program-specific assurances for the program. And then we'll go over each component of the application package that you will need to complete and the submission process, and give you information on the application window that is now open until the deadline date of August 24th, 2021. As a reminder, this technical assistance is not a substitute for reading the assurances, the application guidance, and all other related program assurances, terms and conditions, and federal laws and regulations. The purpose of the ARP ESSER program is to provide emergency relief funds to your district to help reopen schools safely, to aid in sustaining safe school operations, and to support students who have been severely impacted by the pandemic, which is all of our students. The ARP ESSER subgrant is to support districts and schools in safely returning students to in-person classroom instruction and restoring and maintaining high-quality learning environments. There is also a requirement that districts use a portion of funds to take action to mitigate learning loss. I'll give more details on that in a moment. As a reminder, staff of the South Carolina Department of Education presented a technical assistance session on May 19th that covered the specific requirements of this subgrant program. If you did not participate in that webinar, we strongly encourage you to view the recording and the slide deck. Both are accessible on the ARP ESSER Funding Information webpage near the bottom. At this point, I'll briefly go over some of the requirements of the ARP ESSER. Again, for more information on these requirements, please review the May 19th Technical Assistance webinar recording and slide deck. South Carolina has received more than $2 billion. Almost $2 billion is going to LEAs through subgrants that are active until September 30th, 2024. It is required by the law that school districts must use at least 20% of their subawards to address learning loss through the implementation of evidence-based learning interventions. In addition, school districts must ensure that these interventions respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs and address the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on student subgroups that have been identified in Section 111 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, along with students who are experiencing homelessness and children and youth in foster care. And this slide shows an excerpt from the American Rescue Plan Act, which states this requirement. Also, as required by the American Rescue Plan Act, the South Carolina Department of Education issued awards to school districts on May 24th that contain 2/3 of the funds to that district. In order to receive the remaining 1/3 of funds, districts must submit a complete application package by August 24th. I will give you more information in a few minutes on what composes a complete application package. Additional requirements of the ARP ESSER is that the school district submit a safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan. These were due June 24th. And also the ARP ESSER subgrant application, which is the subject of our technical assistance today. Additional requirements of the ARP ESSER are the 20% of the subgrant going to evidence-based interventions to address the academic impact of lost instructional time that has affected students, and that you maintain equity for high poverty schools during the term of this subgrant. To give you more information and help address questions, the U.S. Department of Education has made 2 frequently asked questions documents available. We encourage you to download these documents and use them in addressing your questions. One is on frequently asked questions about the ESSER and GEAR funds, which was released in May 2021. And the second one specifically addresses the maintenance of equity requirements for using the ARP ESSER funds. As a reminder, like the CARES Act ESSER funds and the ESSER II funds issued under the SRSA Act, these are emergency funds. The ARP ESSER funds are not stimulus funds. These are some questions to ask as you're making determinations about whether it is allowable to use the ARP ESSER funds for some of your budgeted plans. Is the use of funds intended to prevent, prepare for, or respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, including its impact on the social, emotional, mental health, and academic needs of students? Does the use of funds fall under one of the authorized uses of ESSER funds? Additional questions to ask include, is the use of funds permissible under the uniform administrative requirements, cost principles, and audit requirements for federal awards? This is the uniform grant guidance, or the grant guidance section of federal regulations. And another question to ask is it necessary and reasonable for the performance of your ESSER subgrant award to make that purchase? In addition to this session, the South Carolina Department of Education will be providing additional technical assistance, including guidance on using the district's academic recovery plan to complete your ARP ESSER application, allowability procedures, including the questions I just went through for using your ARP ESSER and other ESSER funds, and maintenance of equity, and more topics as they become available. Please watch the SCDE's ARP ESSER funding information webpage and be on the lookout for more announcements about this technical assistance. Now we're going to look at the application package itself and what's required for a complete application. The required attachments include a GEPA statement, an ARP ESSER plan, the spending plan form for the ARP ESSER, and a signed copy of the revised program-specific assurances. Looking first at the GEPA statement, the GEPA is the General Education Performance Act. The General Education Provisions Act, and Section 427 of that act requires that applicants seeking federal subgrants must include a description of steps they will take to ensure equitable access to and participation in all subgrant activities. The GEPA identifies 6 types of barriers that can impede equitable access, and more information on how to structure and what to include in your GEPA statement is available in the application guidance document on page 24. But some things are to remember in creating a GEPA statement is to consider your proposed activities and identify at least one barrier that could prevent someone from participating in those activities. Then explain what your district will do to help that person overcome those barriers. Be specific with how you will overcome those barriers. And then when you're done, save the GEPA statement as a PDF so that you'll be able to upload it in the application form. Next is the ARP ESSER plan, which is a template form that you will insert information into. And it is structured into 5 components: a budget overview, a high-level budget, an evaluation and review section, a section for consultation and public input response, and assurances. In the budget overview, you'll be asked to insert the amount that your LEA will be receiving in its subaward, which you can find on the SCDE's ARP ESSER funding information webpage. You will also enter the required 20% of that subaward that's to address learning loss, and then a narrative on how your district will use funds to implement prevention and mitigation strategies that are consistent with the Centers for Disease Control guidance on reopening schools in order to continuously and safely open and operate schools for in-person learning. In the next section of the form, you will enter the amounts budgeted for each allowable category, including the 20% set aside required to address learning loss, and the remaining allowable cost sections, which correspond to what the SCDE has been terming buckets, such as activities authorized under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the Perkins Act, and the Adult Education Allowable Act, coordination, preparedness, and response efforts, and the other sections, including things like mental health services and supports, and improving indoor air quality. The template then allows you to enter the specific ways that your district will use funds for activities to address learning loss. And this is to correspond with that 20% of funds that must be set aside to address the academic impact of lost instructional time through the implementation of evidence-based interventions. This part of the form is divided into different content areas, and we encourage you to align the information with what you have included in your district's academic recovery plan that was submitted to the South Carolina Department of Education in May. After that section of the form, you will enter information about the activities for your remaining funds that correspond to the 15 allowable buckets, and these should be applicable to your plans for using your ARP ESSER funds. The next section of the template for your ARP ESSER plan is where you will describe how your district gathered public input for your plan. You will be asked to provide a description of how you got the input and include specific dates for when you gathered input from specific stakeholder groups, including students, families, school and district administrators, including special education administrators, teachers, principals, school leaders, other educators, school staff, and others. The last section of the plan template features the assurances that were presented in the May 24th subgrant that you've already received. In addition to these assurances, you will need to review the revised program-specific assurances that are included in the application guidance. As part of a complete application, the superintendent of the district must sign a new revised program-specific assurances that must be uploaded with the application form. I'll give you more information on that in just a moment. The revised program-specific assurances are included in the request for proposals, the application guidance, starting on page 21. And they've been revised from what you've already seen with your subgrant award to include an item 6, which presents the requirements that restrict lobbying as set forth in Part 82 of EDGAR, which is 34 CFR Part 82. An electronic form containing the revised program-specific assurances is available so that it can be completed electronically and the superintendent can sign electronically for submitting. Another part of the complete application is the spending plan form, which is a formatted Excel form that you should already be familiar with. This format. It's a similar format to what the SCD provided for the CARES Act ESSER 1 subgrant and the SRSA Act ESSER 2 subgrant. It includes the spending plan categories and space for you to include information on how you plan to use funds for each of the spending categories. To complete this form, you will enter your budget narrative and amounts in the cost categories for each spending category for which you plan to use your ARP ESSER funds. And then at the end of the form, there's a budget summary that will auto-populate. Like the previous forms, the total remaining balance will need to be 0 for you to be able to complete and submit this spending plan form. And the superintendent of the district should read the attestation information and sign electronically and date the form. To find the application forms needed to compile your application, please go to the SCDE's Grants Opportunities site, which is accessible from the Hot Topics box on the SCDE's webpage. From there, you will scroll down from the Grant Opportunities webpage to the ARP ESSER Program Subgrant link and click through to the subgrant webpage, which contains overview information about this opportunity. Under the Documents section is the application guidance and all the forms that you will need to complete the application. And there's also a hyperlink to the online application form. But before you open that application form and start to apply, you're going to want to prepare to apply by reading the application guidance carefully. If, in reading the guidance, you have any questions, please email those to scesser@ed.sc.gov, and someone from our Office of Emergency Programs will be in touch with you to address your questions and concerns. The next step in preparing to apply is to complete the application attachments. That includes the ARP ESSER plan and the spending plan, GEPA statement, and revised program assurances that I showed you a little earlier. You'll want to get all the signatures for the assurances forms and save those documents as directed. And then you can access the application form because you have prepared the attachments for that form. The application form will require you to enter some contact information that's printed on the application, in the application guidance document on page 12. There's a screenshot of that contact information section of the form so you can see what's needed. And then you will attach under the Documents section of the form the GEPA statement, your completed ARP ESSER plan, your spending plan, and the signed revised assurances form. The next step after the documents are attached is to review the information in the attestation section. We encourage the superintendent to read that carefully and then enter the superintendent's name as an electronic signature and date, and then the superintendent is ready to submit the form. That completes this technical assistance for how to complete the ARP ESSER subgrant application form and have a completed application before August 24th, 2021, when the application window ends. If you have any questions, please email scesser@ed.sc.gov and someone will be happy to respond as soon as possible with information. And also visit our agency's ARP ESSER funding information webpage for more resources and frequently asked questions documents. I'm Audrey Shiflett with the Grants Program at the South Carolina Department of Education, and I thank you for your time today.